For thousands of years, the galaxy had kept a secret. Not just any secret, but one so deeply buried, so carefully guarded, that even mentioning it in official records was forbidden. The secret was Earth. And the rule tied to it was simple, absolute, and known across every starfaring civilization. Don't wake the humans. No one really remembered why the rule existed. The oldest archives spoke of a time when humanity had nearly torn the galaxy apart, not with raw power, but with something far more dangerous: unpredictability. Humans didn't follow logic. They didn't respect treaties unless it suited them. They built weapons out of ideas, turned despair into fuel, and somehow always came back, stronger, angrier, and smarter, no matter how many times they were pushed to extinction. After the last Great War, the surviving galactic powers made a silent pact. They sealed Earth in a bubble of stasis fields, cloaked it in false readings, and erased it from all public star maps. Let them sleep, let them stay forgotten. It was safer that way. Out on the edge of known space, aboard the sleek silver command vessel Whisper of Reason, Consul Vrel of the Qatari hegemony scrolled through routine survey data with mild boredom. His species had ruled peaceful sectors for centuries, guided by logic, order, and deep respect for ancient protocols. But Vrel? He'd always thought the "don't wake the humans" rule was nonsense, a relic of fear-mongering from a bygone era. Humans were extinct, or so close to it that it didn't matter. Their planet was a radioactive graveyard, covered in rust and silence. Why waste energy maintaining a quarantine around a tomb? He leaned back in his chair, sipping synth tea, and glanced at the live feed from Sol System, just another dead system orbiting a middle-aged star. Nothing moved. Nothing blinked. Perfectly still. Too still, maybe. That's what caught his eye. The energy readings from Earth's surface were flat, not the natural decay you'd expect from a dead world, but unnaturally smooth, like someone had smoothed over the planet with a blanket of silence. Curiosity prickled at him. Not the reckless kind, he told himself. Just scientific interest. After all, the Concord allowed passive scans of quarantine zones as long as they didn't interfere. So he authorized a low-orbit sensor sweep, just a gentle pulse, barely stronger than starlight, to map surface anomalies. Harmless routine. Nothing to worry about. The moment the scan beam touched Earth's upper atmosphere, every alarm on the Whisper of Reason shrieked to life. Red lights flashed. Emergency protocols locked down non-essential systems. A deep, resonant voice, older than the ship itself, boomed through the bridge. Violation detected. Primary law breached. Signal transmitted to all Concord vessels. Prepare for containment response. Vrel froze, cup halfway to his lips. That's impossible, he muttered. It was just a scan. A whisper. But it wasn't just a whisper to Earth. Deep beneath the cracked crust of the planet, in vaults carved into the bones of mountains and buried under oceans of ash, something stirred. Machines that hadn't moved in centuries whirred back to life. Power cells, fed by geothermal vents and cosmic radiation, flickered from standby to active. Cryochambers lined with frost and time began to warm. Inside them, hearts that had beat only once every decade started beating once every second. The humans weren't gone. They were waiting, and they'd just been poked. On the bridge, Vrel watched in growing dread as his console lit up with incoming priority alerts from the Galactic Concord Synod. Dozens of messages, all marked with the highest urgency. One headline stood out. Stasis field collapse imminent. All nearby vessels evacuate Sol System immediately. He tried to cancel the scan. Too late. The beam had already done its work. Like dropping a stone into a still pond, the ripple was spreading, and the pond was waking up. Down on Earth, in a vault beneath what was once the Rocky Mountains, a heavy metal door groaned open for the first time in 800 years. Dust fell like snow. A figure stepped out, tall, lean, wrapped in a suit that shimmered like liquid metal. Their eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the dim corridor. No panic, no confusion. Just focus. On a wrist display, a single line of text blinked. External stimulus detected. Threat level, unknown. Protocol, observe, assess, respond. Outside, the sky was still dark, but not for long. Back on the Whisper of Reason, Vrel ordered a full retreat. Engines flared. The ship turned toward the jump point. But as they pulled away, a small probe, launched automatically during the scan, drifted lower into Earth's atmosphere, sending back live visuals. Frel couldn't look away. The footage showed ruined cities, yes, crumbled towers overgrown with vines and silence. But then movement. Tiny at first, a flicker of light in a shattered skyscraper, a shadow darting between rusted vehicles. Then more. Dozens. Hundreds. Figures emerging from subway tunnels, from underground farms, from hidden hangars beneath dried-up riverbeds. They moved with purpose. They carried tools that looked like weapons, and they were all looking up at the sky, at him. One of them raised a device that looked like a jury-rigged antenna. A second later, a crackling voice burst through the ship's comms, raw, human, and utterly calm. "Thanks for the hello. We'll be up in a bit." The transmission cut off. The probe's feed went dark, not from malfunction, but because something on the ground had shot it out of the sky with terrifying precision. Frel sank into his chair, his hands trembling. He hadn't uncovered a relic. He'd kicked a sleeping storm, and now the whole galaxy would feel the thunder. The ancient law hadn't been about fear of what humans were. It was about fear of what they'd become when woken too soon. And Consul Vrel, in his arrogance, had just hit the snooze button one too many times. Now there was no going back. Earth was awake, and the universe was about to remember why it had been so afraid to begin with. Beneath the cracked surface of Earth, silence had ruled for centuries. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, waiting kind. Like a coiled spring. Like a breath held too long. And now that breath was finally let out. The moment the alien scan touched the planet, it was as if a switch had flipped deep in the bones of the world. Not just in one place, but everywhere at once. In vaults under frozen tundras, in domes buried beneath desert sands, in hollowed-out asteroids orbiting the moon, machines hummed to life. Lights flickered on in corridors that hadn't seen a human step in generations. Cryopods hissed open, releasing clouds of vapor into cold, sterile air. The people who stepped out weren't confused. They weren't scared. They'd been trained for this. Not by teachers or commanders, but by the quiet rhythm of survival itself. Every child born in the vaults learned the same truth. The sky is not safe. But one day we'll go back up. And now that day had come, they didn't waste time talking. No speeches, no panic, just action. Teams moved through tunnels like ghosts, checking systems, powering up old networks, syncing with the planetary AI that had watched over them while they slept. That AI, called Warden in the old tongue, had been waiting too. It had monitored the stars, listened to alien chatter on deep space frequencies, and kept Earth hidden. But now its job had changed. Now it was time to fight. High above, the alien probe still drifted, sending back images of a dead world. But down below, humans were already tracking it. A group in what used to be the Pacific Northwest locked onto its signal. One of them, a wiry engineer with grease on their hands and a grin on their face, hooked a salvaged railgun to a solar battery array. It wasn't pretty. The barrel was patched with scrap metal, the targeting system cobbled together from old drone parts. But it worked. With a thunderous crack that echoed through the silent forest, the railgun fired. The probe didn't just go dark, it exploded into glittering dust before it even knew it was under attack. On the alien ship watching from orbit, alarms blared again. But this time it wasn't just one signal. Dozens, hundreds, then thousands. Energy signatures bloomed across the planet like fireflies waking at once. Power plants hidden under mountains roared to life. Orbital defense platforms, long thought destroyed, rotated silently into position, their lenses glowing faint blue. Factories buried in old subway systems began churning out drones, weapons, and ship parts from recycled metal and asteroid ore. The humans weren't just awake. They were ready, and they weren't the same species the galaxy remembered. Centuries of isolation had changed them. Not in looks, still human, still familiar, but in how they thought, how they built, how they fought. They didn't need big fleets or fancy shields. They made do. A broken satellite became a sensor net. A rusted car frame became armor plating. Old data chips buried in libraries turned to rubble, were dug up and used to train new AIs. They didn't wait for perfect conditions. They created advantage out of nothing. One team in the ruins of an old coastal city dragged a half-sunken aircraft carrier onto dry land. Within hours, they'd welded solar panels to its deck and mounted plasma turrets on its wings. Another group in the Sahara repurposed ancient mining drones into swarm fighters, tiny, fast, and deadly in packs. They didn't have a central command barking orders. They moved like a single mind, connected through neural links and shared purpose. And they remembered something the galaxy had forgotten. Humans don't just survive. They adapt fast. Back on the alien vessel, Consul Vrel stared at the data pouring in. His hands gripped the edge of the console. "This can't be real," he whispered. "They've been asleep for 800 years. How are they doing this?" His science officer, voice tight with fear, replied, "Sir, they didn't sleep. They prepared. While we built museums to remember them, they built weapons to return." Down on Earth, a young woman stood on a rooftop in what was once Chicago. The wind tugged at her jacket, stitched with patches from old mission patches and family photos. She held a handheld scanner, watching energy readings climb. Around her, others worked, welding, coding, testing engines. No one shouted. No one complained. They just did. She looked up at the stars, not with wonder, but with focus. "They woke us up," she said to no one in particular. "Now they get to see what we've been dreaming about." And what they'd been dreaming about wasn't peace. Not yet. First, they needed to prove they weren't prey anymore. In orbit, the first real test came fast. A conquered patrol ship sent to assess the situation drifted too close. It wasn't hostile, just curious, but curiosity near Earth was dangerous now. The humans didn't fire missiles. They didn't send warships. Instead, they unleashed something quieter, a swarm of micro-drones no bigger than insects launched from hidden silos across the planet. The drones latched onto the alien ship's hull, overloaded its sensors, and fed false data into its navigation. Within minutes, the ship was spinning helplessly, blinded and lost. It wasn't destroyed. It was humiliated. And that was worse. The message was clear. You don't get to watch us. You don't get to judge us. Not anymore. Back in the vaults, children who had only known stories of the sky now watched real-time feeds of alien ships retreating. Elders who had spent lifetimes maintaining the old tech smiled for the first time in decades. This wasn't revenge. It was rebirth. The humans weren't angry. They were awake. And awake humans didn't ask for permission. They built. They learned. They pushed forward. As night fell over the ruins of Paris, a massive crane lifted a half-finished starship from a dry riverbed. Its hull gleamed under floodlights, patched imperfect but undeniably alive. Workers cheered, not loudly but with quiet pride. That ship wouldn't just leave Earth. It would carry humanity back into the stars, not as beggars, not as relics, but as equals. Or something more. Consul Vrel, now watching from a safe distance, finally understood. The galaxy hadn't feared humans because they were violent. They feared them because they were relentless. Give them a problem and they'd solve it. Give them a wall and they'd climb it, or build a ladder from the pieces. Leave them alone for centuries and they'd come back with something you never saw coming. Earth wasn't a tomb. It was a forge, and the fire had just been lit. The humans weren't coming back slowly. They were already here, and the universe was about to meet the species that refused to stay buried. Panic doesn't spread slowly in space. It explodes, fast, silent, and cold. The moment Earth's surface lit up with thousands of active signals, the galactic concord didn't just notice. It shattered. Emergency channels lit up across 100 worlds. Diplomats who hadn't raised their voices in centuries were shouting over encrypted lines. War councils that hadn't met since the last great conflict were summoned in the middle of the night. And at the heart of it all was one question, repeated in every language, on every ship, in every capital. What have we done? The old records, locked away in vaults labeled "Do Not Access," were pulled out and read aloud in trembling voices. They told stories the younger generations had dismissed as myth. Stories of human fleets that didn't follow battle formations, that split into dozens of unpredictable groups and attacked from blind spots no strategist could predict. Stories of human engineers who turned captured enemy tech into weapons within hours. Stories of entire alien armadas retreating not because they were beaten, but because they were confused, outthought, outmaneuvered, and left wondering how a species with so little had done so much. Now those stories weren't myths anymore. They were warnings, and they'd come too late. The High Synod, the ruling body of the conquered, met in a grand chamber orbiting a quiet star. Their faces, usually calm and unreadable, were tight with fear. One elder, his scales dull with stress, spoke what everyone was thinking. We broke the one law that kept the peace. Now we must contain the breach before it spreads. Containment. That was the word they used. Not war, not surrender. Containment. As if humanity were a fire that could be smothered with enough blankets. They ordered immediate action, reinforce the old quarantine fields, deploy pacification drones, jam all outgoing signals from Earth, and, most importantly, erase any evidence that the humans were awake. To the rest of the galaxy, Earth would remain a dead world, a ghost. But Earth wasn't playing along. While the Conquered scrambled to cover its mistake, humans were already broadcasting. Not threats. Not declarations of war. Just simple, clear messages on every open frequency. Signal received. Thank you for the wake-up. We're coming up. The tone wasn't angry. It was almost cheerful, like someone stretching after a long nap. And that was what scared the Conquered the most. Anger you could predict, rage you could prepare for. But calm confidence? That was unknown territory. Then came the real shock. A Concorde scout ship sent to test Earth's defenses never made it past lunar orbit. It didn't explode. It didn't get shot down. It just stopped. All systems froze. The crew reported seeing strange patterns flicker across their screens. Code, symbols, something that looked almost like human writing. Before their ship's AI shut itself off voluntarily. When they rebooted, a single message blinked on every screen. Nice ship. Try again when you're ready to talk, not spy. The humans hadn't destroyed it. They'd hacked it. From the ground. With tech the Conquered couldn't even identify. Back on Earth, people weren't celebrating. They were working. In underground labs, teams studied fragments of the alien probe they'd shot down, reverse engineering its materials. In orbital shipyards hidden behind the moon, half-finished vessels hummed with new power cores built from scavenged parts and human ingenuity. Children who'd grown up reading old textbooks about stars now helped calibrate targeting systems. Elders who remembered the last war taught the young how to think like the enemy, how to spot weakness, how to turn silence into advantage. The Conquered thought they were dealing with survivors. But Earth wasn't surviving anymore. It was rising, and the galaxy was starting to notice. Out on the frontier, independent traders and small colonies began picking up Earth signals. At first they thought it was a glitch, then a joke. But when a human-made drone, small, sleek, and clearly not Conquered tech, delivered a data packet to a mining outpost near Alpha Centauri, containing schematics for a more efficient fusion reactor, people started listening. The message inside read, "We remember you helped us once. This is returned, no demands, no strings, just a gift, and with it a quiet reminder. Humans hadn't forgotten who stood with them in the old days." That small act did more damage to the Conquered's control than any weapon could. Doubt began to spread. Was humanity really the monster the Concord claimed? Or had they been locked away out of fear, not safety? Consul Vrel, now stripped of his rank and confined to a remote observation post, watched it all unfold with growing dread. He'd expected chaos. Instead, he saw something far worse, unity. Humans weren't lashing out blindly. They were reaching out, carefully, strategically, and with purpose. They weren't just rebuilding their world. They were rebuilding their place in the galaxy. The Conquered's emergency fleet, dozens of warships armed with the latest pacification tech, finally gathered at the edge of Sol system. Commanders gave speeches about restoring order, about protecting the peace. But in private, crews whispered. They'd heard the stories. They'd seen the footage of that scout ship, helpless and humiliated. None of them wanted to be the first to cross that invisible line into Earth's space. And then, just as the fleet prepared to move in, Earth sent one more message. This time it wasn't on open channels. It was directed straight to the flagship's command deck. No encryption, no tricks, just a live feed. The screen showed a simple room, walls lined with old books, a window looking out over green hills and solar panels. A human stood there, not in armor, not in uniform, just wearing plain clothes. They looked tired, but their eyes were sharp. "We know you're scared," the human said, voice calm. "You locked us away because you thought we'd burn the galaxy down. But we didn't wake up to destroy. We woke up to build. If you come in peace, we'll meet you with open hands. If you come with weapon, well, you already know how that ends." The feed cut out. Silence filled the command deck. No one spoke for a full minute, because they did know how it ended. The records were clear. Every time the galaxy had tried to control humanity, Humanity had slipped through its fingers and come back stronger. Now the sleeping storm was wide awake. And the Concorde had to decide, would they face it with fear or with respect? The answer would shape the next 1,000 years, and Earth wasn't waiting for them to make up their minds. The Concorde's fleet hung at the edge of the solar system like a held breath. Dozens of warships, sleek and silent, bristling with weapons designed to pacify entire civilizations without firing a single shot. They'd faced rebellions before. They'd handled rogue AIs, rogue planets, even rogue stars. But this was different. This was Earth. And Earth wasn't playing by anyone's rules but its own. Down on the planet, humans didn't panic. They didn't build walls or dig deeper bunkers. They did what they'd always done best. They got to work. In the weeks since waking, they'd turned ruins into factories, scrap into starships, and silence into strategy. Old orbital docks, long buried under layers of dust and time, were dragged back online. Solar collectors bloomed across the moon like metallic flowers, beaming clean energy down to launch pads hidden in mountain craters. What looked like junk to outsiders was, to humans, raw material. A broken satellite became a sensor array. A rusted cargo hauler became the skeleton of a new fighter. Nothing was wasted. Everything had a second life. And the ships they built weren't like the Concordes, smooth, perfect, mass-produced. Human vessels were rough around the edges, patched together with ingenuity and stubbornness, but they were fast, agile, and terrifyingly smart. Their onboard AIs didn't just follow orders, they learned. Every battle, every scan, every encounter made them sharper. While the Concorde relied on centuries of doctrine, humans rewrote the rules mid-flight. The first real clash came not with a grand declaration, but with a simple test. A Concorde cruiser, bold or foolish enough to drift closer than ordered, sent out a standard cease and desist signal. Before the message even finished transmitting, 3 human fighters, no bigger than shuttles, slipped out from behind Mars. They didn't fire. They didn't threaten. They just circled. Like wolves testing a fence, then in under a minute they vanished, not by jumping away, but by folding into the debris field of an old asteroid belt, their heat signatures masked by clever thermal cloaking made from recycled insulation foam and reflective foil. The cruiser's sensors lost them completely. Minutes later, the cruiser's comms lit up with a new message. "You're broadcasting on an open channel." Anyone could have heard that. Try encryption next time. Attached was a full diagnostic of the ship's security flaws, written in plain language with helpful suggestions. It wasn't an attack. It was a lesson, and the Concorde didn't like being taught, but they couldn't ignore it either. Back on Earth, people weren't gloating. In underground command centers lit by flickering LEDs, teams analyzed every bit of data from the encounter. They studied the alien ship's movements, its shield frequencies, its communication patterns. By dawn, they'd already designed a countermeasure, a small drone that could mimic Concorde signals and confuse enemy targeting systems. By noon, they were building 100 of them. That was the thing the galaxy kept underestimating. Humans didn't just fight. They improved while fighting. Every loss was a lesson. Every win was a blueprint. And they shared everything. A fix discovered in a vault under Antarctica was uploaded to every workshop on the planet within minutes. A new hull design tested over the Pacific was already being welded onto ships in Africa by sunset. While the Concorde debated ethics and protocols in hushed council chambers, humans were already 3 steps ahead, building, testing, adapting. Then came the real shock. Deep in the asteroid belt, hidden inside a hollowed-out rock, humans activated something the Concorde thought impossible, a partial Dyson swarm. Not the full planet-encircling megastructure of legend, but enough solar collectors to power an entire fleet. And they'd built it in less than a month, using robots made from old mining bots, using mirrors forged from melted-down satellites, using math scribbled on chalkboards in classrooms that hadn't seen students in centuries. The energy surge lit up every sensor in the system. The Concorde watched in disbelief as Earth's orbital defenses powered up to full capacity, not with slow, steady growth, but with a sudden, brilliant surge of light and power that screamed, "We're ready." Still, the Concorde refused to back down. Pride was a heavy chain. They launched their containment fleet, hundreds of ships moving in perfect formation, shields interlocked, weapons primed. They would surround Earth, they would cut off all signals. They would force humanity back into silence. But Earth didn't wait to be surrounded. As the fleet advanced, human ships didn't meet them head-on. Instead, they struck at the edges, fast surgical hits. A supply tender disabled by a swarm of micro-drones. A communications relay quietly hacked and rerouted. A scout ship lured into a gravity well and left spinning, helpless but unharmed. The humans weren't trying to destroy. They were trying to demonstrate here, and then came the moment that changed everything. A captured Concorde weapon, a plasma cannon designed to melt through planetary crusts, was reverse-engineered in under 48 hours. Not just copied. Improved. Humans added a focusing lens made from crystallized lunar glass, boosted its range with a recycled fusion core, and mounted it on a salvaged freighter. They didn't use it to attack. They fired it into empty space just to show they could. The beam cut through vacuum like a knife, clean and precise, hitting a dead moon 3 light seconds away and carving a perfect symbol into its surface. The old Earth flag. Simple and bold. The message wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. We can use your weapons better than you. Panic rippled through the conquered fleet. Orders got confused. Ships hesitated. And in that hesitation, the humans moved. From hidden lunar bases, from orbital shipyards, from repurposed cargo haulers, human vessels poured into space. Not in neat lines. Not in predictable waves. They came like a storm, chaotic, relentless, and impossible to pin down. Some carried weapons. Some carried tools. Some carried nothing but data, offers of trade, blueprints for clean energy, open source code for medical AIs. They weren't just warriors. They were builders, healers, teachers, and fighters when they needed to be. The conquered had spent millennia believing peace meant control. Humans knew better. Peace meant choice, and Earth had just claimed its right to choose. By the time the Concorde fleet finally retreated, not in defeat, but in stunned silence, the solar system had changed. Earth wasn't a quarantine zone anymore. It was a power. Not because it had the biggest guns, but because it had something the galaxy had forgotten. The will to rise no matter how many times it was buried. And the humans? They weren't done. They were just getting started. The stars were waiting, and this time they wouldn't ask for permission to reach them. The Concorde's final fleet gathered at the edge of Sol system like a last breath before a storm. Hundreds of ships gleaming under the pale light of the distant sun formed a wall of metal and might. This was it. Their last chance to restore order, to push humanity back into silence, to pretend the last few weeks had never happened. Their commanders spoke in hushed tones about necessary force and preserving galactic stability. But beneath the polished words, fear hummed like a live wire. Down on Earth, no one was shouting. No one was panicking. In fact, the mood was almost calm, like people who'd already fought the real battle inside themselves and won. Workshops buzzed with quiet energy. Children helped load data drives onto newly finished ships. Elders stood on rooftops watching the sky not with dread, but with something close to pride. Because Earth wasn't waiting to be attacked. It was ready to meet the galaxy on its own terms. As the conquered fleet moved in, something unexpected happened. Instead of launching weapons or scrambling fighters, Earth sent out a single ship. Not a warship. Not even armed. Just a small, sleek vessel, patched together from old parts, painted with simple symbols, flying no flag but a plain blue circle with a white leaf inside it. A sign of life, of peace, but not weakness. That ship drifted to the center of the empty space between the two forces and opened a channel. Not encrypted, not hidden, broadcast on every frequency, for every world, every trader, every listening ear in the galaxy to hear. A human voice came through, steady, clear, and calm. You came to contain us, to silence us. Again. But we're not the same species you locked away. We've spent centuries learning, building, and remembering, not just how to survive, but why we're worth saving. We don't want your fear. We don't want your control. We just want a seat at the table. Then came the offer. Simple, direct, revolutionary. First, Earth would join the Galactic Conquered, not as a subject, not as a ward, but as an equal member. Second, all knowledge, medical, scientific, historical, would be shared freely both ways. No more secrets. No more hiding. Third, One new law would be added to the oldest treaties in the galaxy. A law written not in fear but in respect. Never underestimate humanity again. Silence followed. Not the empty kind. The heavy kind, the kind that comes when history shifts on its axis. The conquered commanders didn't know how to respond. They'd prepared for war, not negotiation. They'd expected rage, not reason. And that small ship, floating alone in the void, carried more weight than their entire armada. Then, something even more surprising happened. From the outer colonies, places the conquered had long ignored, ships began to appear. Not military. Civilian freighters, research vessels, even old colony transports. They didn't side with Earth. They didn't side with the conquered. They just showed up. Because they'd heard the broadcasts. They'd seen the reactor schematics, the medical algorithms, the open-source designs for clean water systems Earth had sent out freely. They'd seen a species that didn't hoard knowledge but shared it like bread. And they were tired of being ruled by fear, one by one. Those ships moved to flank Earth's lone vessel, not as an army but as witnesses. As allies by choice, not command. Faced with that quiet show of unity, the Concorde had no choice. Their fleet powered down its weapons. Their flagship opened a secure channel. And after hours of tense talks, not in grand chambers but over simple voice links, the agreement was made. Earth would join the Synod. Knowledge would flow both ways. And the new law would be etched into every treaty, every archive, every school lesson across the stars. Back on the planet, there were no wild celebrations, no fireworks, just people going back to work, building, teaching, healing. But in their eyes, there was a new kind of light. Not the fire of war, but the steady glow of dignity restored. Consul Vrel watched it all from a distant observation post, now a disgraced exile. He'd broken the one law the galaxy held sacred, and in doing so, he'd forced it to grow up. He saw ships from a dozen worlds landing on Earth, not to conquer, but to learn. He saw human engineers walking side by side with alien scientists, sharing tools, laughing over broken translators, sketching ideas on shared screens. The universe hadn't ended. It had expanded, and humanity, they weren't just awake, they were leading. In the months that followed, Earth became something new, not a hidden ruin, but a crossroads. A place where old enemies traded stories over cups of real coffee, where alien children learned human math through games built from recycled code, where humans in turn studied star maps older than their species and whispered, "We have so much to learn." But they also taught. They showed the galaxy that strength wasn't just in weapons or shields. It was in sharing, in adapting, in never giving up even when the whole universe told you to stay buried. The old fear didn't vanish overnight. But it began to fade, replaced by something rarer, respect. And high above Earth, in orbit, a new station took shape, built by many hands, many species. At its center hung a simple plaque, written in every known language. It didn't speak of victory. It didn't speak of power. It just said, "We woke up. We listened, we built, and now we move forward together." The universe had learned its lesson. And humanity finally was home, not just on Earth, but among the stars. Not as a threat, not as a myth, but as neighbors, partners, and equals. And somewhere, deep in the quiet of space, the old law was rewritten. Not with fear, but with hope. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing in the galaxy isn't a weapon, it's an idea. And the idea that humans deserved a place in the light, that changed everything.